The crack of gunfire echoed across the Hawthorne Elite Shooting Club as Sarah Winters stood at the reception desk, her weathered hands clutching registration forms for the Regional Marksmanship Championship. The 52-year-old librarian looked absurdly out of place, her modest cardigan and practical shoes a stark contrast to the tactical gear, clad men who dominated the prestigious facility. The receptionist's perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently on the mahogany counter as she scanned Sarah's application with thinly veiled disdain. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This competition is for advanced shooters with verified credentials, not for beginners." Sarah opened her mouth to respond when a booming laugh cut through the conversation. "Is someone's grandmother trying to sign up for my competition?" The voice belonged to Victor Harlow, the club's owner and 5-time national shooting champion, his imposing frame blocking the light as he approached the desk, his eyes, cold and calculating, dismissed Sarah with a single glance. "I registered online last week," Sarah replied quietly, her voice steady despite the growing discomfort. "I paid the entry fee and received confirmation." Harlow snatched the paperwork, scanning it before his mouth curved into what could generously be called a smile, but his eyes remained cold. "Look, Miss Winters, this is an invitation-only event with the governor attending. We have former military specialists and Olympic-level competitors here, so frankly, your presence would be inappropriate." Behind him, a group of men exchanged knowing looks and poorly concealed smirks. Among them was Gregory Jensen, Harlow's protege and business partner in ventures extending far beyond the shooting range, his expression one of open mockery as he studied Sarah's unassuming figure. "I've met all the qualification requirements listed on your website," Sarah insisted, her tone soft but firm. "The online system clearly malfunctioned," Harlow replied, tearing her application in half with deliberate slowness. "Now, why don't you step aside and let the serious competitors through? We're very busy today." The silence that followed was punctuated only by distant gunshots from the practice range. Sarah didn't flinch at the dismissal. Instead, her gaze drifted past Harlow to the electronic scoreboard displaying the morning's results. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she scanned the numbers, and the corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. An older man seated in the corner glanced up from his coffee, his weathered face showing no amusement at the scene unfolding before him. Unlike the others, his attention caught on something in Sarah's demeanor, a stillness, a certain way she held herself that seemed strangely familiar. His eyes widened slightly in recognition, though he remained silent, watching with newfound interest. "If you truly believe in fair competition, Mr. Harlow," Sarah said with unexpected clarity, "perhaps you'd be willing to test my skills before dismissing me so thoroughly." The challenge hung in the air, causing Harlow's condescending smile to falter momentarily. A ripple of whispers spread through the onlookers. This mousy woman was either delusional or hiding something extraordinary behind her unremarkable appearance. "Fine," Harlow finally conceded with a dismissive wave. "Lane 15 is open. Let's see what you can do with a real firearm, though I doubt you've handled anything more powerful than a stapler at that library of yours." The laughter that followed Sarah to the equipment area was predictable. What wasn't predictable was what would happen next. 10 perfect headshots in 10 seconds that would shatter more than just the club's shooting record. It would expose a conspiracy reaching all the way to the governor's mansion and change the fate of an entire community hanging in the balance. As Sarah methodically checked the club-provided pistol, her fingers moved with practiced precision that no one seemed to notice. In her mind, she wasn't at Hawthorne Elite anymore. She was back in the dusty landscapes where she had once been known by a very different name, Ghost. 20 years earlier, under the merciless Afghan sun, a younger Sarah Winters had lain prone on scorching desert ground, her breath steady despite the heat shimmering around her. Through the scope of her rifle, she tracked a target barely visible to the naked eye, nearly 1,000 yards away. Breathe. Adjust. Squeeze. Came the quiet instruction from Captain William Daniels, her tactical shooting instructor. The crack of her shot split the air, followed seconds later by the metallic ping of a perfect hit, her 5th consecutive bullseye at extreme range. "That's 5 for 5 at nearly a kilometer," William noted to his colleague. surprise evident in his voice despite his professional demeanor. "I've never seen natural talent like this. Especially from someone who couldn't even hold the rifle properly 6 weeks ago." Sarah remained focused, recalibrating for her next shot. Seemingly oblivious to the murmurs of astonishment behind her, her journey to this moment had been anything but smooth. As one of only 3 women in the specialized tactical program, she had endured quiet skepticism and constant pressure to prove herself, while male counterparts received immediate respect. The military had never been Sarah's planned career path. With a degree in environmental science and natural aptitude for precision systems, she had initially joined to develop conservation strategies for military-controlled lands. But an aptitude test revealed her extraordinary potential as a marksman, and despite her initial reluctance, she found herself redirected to the elite sniper program. During her decade of service, Sarah had broken 3 long-standing records and developed modifications to standard-issue rifles that were subsequently adopted by her entire unit. Her innovations eventually earned her commendations that remained classified to all but a select few. Now, 20 years later, Sarah Winters stood in the equipment room of the Hawthorne Elite Shooting Club, her fingers moving over the club-provided pistol with the same methodical precision she had once applied to military-grade weapons. The pistol was high quality but not exceptional, certainly not customized to her preferences as her military firearms had been. As she worked, she caught sight of her reflection in a polished display case, her face serious, focused. So different from the uncertain recruit she had once been. Sometimes she barely recognized herself from before the military, before she discovered what she was capable of. After her honorable discharge, Sarah had made a conscious choice to step back from the world of competitive shooting. She'd built a quiet life as a librarian in the rural town of Pinerest, finding satisfaction in helping others access knowledge rather than in hitting targets. She'd settled there specifically because of the pristine wilderness surrounding the community, the same wilderness now threatened by Harlow Development's massive resort project. As she finished her preparations, Victor Harlow appeared at the doorway, leaning against the frame with casual arrogance. "Hey, librarian," he called out, making her look up. "If this turns out to be as embarrassing as I expect, I could find something for you to do around here. Filing, maybe coffee runs? Women still need to know their place in this world, don't they?" His smile didn't reach his eyes, which gleamed with the satisfaction of someone who believed they were firmly at the top of their hierarchy, not just at the shooting range, but in every room he entered. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She simply turned back to the pistol, completed her final adjustments, and then faced him. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Harlow," she said with a politeness that masked the steel beneath. "But I believe I'll just take my turn at the range instead." The look of mild surprise that crossed his face was small but satisfying. Clearly, he'd expected her to be intimidated enough to withdraw. Instead, she picked up the pistol with practiced ease and walked past him toward lane 15, leaving him momentarily speechless in her wake. Little did he know that this unassuming librarian was about to shake the very foundations of the empire he'd built through intimidation, political connections, and environmental destruction. An empire that was weeks away from demolishing an entire community to build a playground for the ultra-wealthy. The qualification round at Hawthorne was structured as a 3-tier challenge, designed to progressively test a shooter's abilities under increasingly difficult conditions. Most newcomers failed at the 2nd tier. Even experienced marksmen often struggled with the 3rd bride. Sarah stood at her assigned lane, aware of the eyes watching her with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation of failure. She could almost feel their collective wish for her to embarrass herself, to reinforce their belief that someone like her didn't belong in their exclusive world. Harlow stood prominently among the spectators, his arms crossed over his chest. Beside him was Gregory Jensen, mimicking his mentor's posture, both wearing identical expressions of smug expectation. "This should be entertaining," Jensen muttered loudly enough for his words to carry. $10 says she doesn't even hit the paper on the first shot." Several of the men chuckled in agreement, placing informal bets on how quickly and spectacularly Sarah would fail. What they couldn't know was that behind her calm exterior, Sarah was making complex calculations: wind speed, humidity, barrel temperature, adjustments that had become second nature through thousands of hours of training. The first-tier target was positioned at 100 yards, a warm-up distance for serious shooters but challenging enough for beginners to struggle. Sarah took her stance. Settling the pistol with practiced familiarity, she drew a steady breath, her mind automatically calculating variables with mathematical precision. When Sarah pulled the trigger, the sound was almost anticlimactic. There was no dramatic recoil, no visible struggle with the weapon. Just a clean, controlled shot. When the target was brought forward for inspection, the bullet hole was precisely through the center, a perfect shot that would have been impressive from anyone. From a supposedly amateur woman who'd been all but laughed out of the building minutes before. It was stunning. A murmur of surprise rippled through the onlookers. Beginner's luck. Harlow dismissed. Though his confident smile had faltered slightly, the second tier will show her limitations. But the second tier, 3 shots at 200 yards with a crosswind simulation, yielded the same result. 3 perfect shots grouped so closely, they formed a single ragged whole, rather than 3 distinct points of impact. The murmurs grew louder. The jokes ceased. By the time Sarah completed the third tier, a series of moving targets at varying distances, even the most skeptical observers had fallen silent. Their disbelief palpable. William Daniels watched from the sidelines, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He recognized Sarah's technique, the economy of movement, the perfect balance of speed and precision that had made her legendary in certain military circles. She was holding back. He could tell, deliberately shooting well but not extraordinarily. Not revealing the full extent of her capability. It was enough to qualify, enough to earn grudging acknowledgement, but not enough to expose her real identity. "Who the hell is she?" one of the club members whispered to another as Sarah completed her final shot. "Nobody shoots like that without years of training." Professional training. The question echoed through the group as they struggled to reconcile the unassuming woman before them with the exceptional skill she'd just demonstrated. Harlow's face had darkened considerably, his pride visibly wounded by this unexpected development. As Sarah set down the pistol and stepped back from the shooting position, he approached her with forced cordiality. "Well, Miss Winters, that was surprisingly competent. You've qualified for the championship," he conceded, though his tone suggested he still didn't consider her a genuine threat. "The preliminary round is tomorrow. Perhaps you'll want to reconsider your participation. The stakes and the pressure will be much higher." "I'll be here," Sarah replied simply, the quiet certainty in her voice causing Harlow's smile to tighten further. As she turned to leave, she found her path blocked by Jensen and 2 other club members. Their expressions no longer amused but wary, even hostile. "We check backgrounds thoroughly for our competitions," Jensen said, his voice low and challenging. "Strange that someone with your apparent skill level doesn't show up in any of the usual competitive circuits. Makes one wonder where exactly you learned to shoot like that." The implication was clear. They would be investigating her, looking for any reason to disqualify her before she could further disrupt their comfortable hierarchy. Before Sarah could respond, a gravelly voice cut through the tension. "I know exactly who she is." William Daniels had risen from his seat and was approaching the group, his weathered face serious, but his eyes bright with something that might have been pride. All heads turned toward the older man, his reputation as a former military training officer earning him immediate attention, despite his preference for observing rather than participating in recent years. "And I'm willing to stake my 40 years of reputation on her right to compete here," he continued, his gaze never leaving Sarah's face. The simple librarian had just fired the first shot in a battle that would extend far beyond the shooting range, a battle for justice, for truth, and for the future of Pinerest itself. The week before the preliminary round hummed with tension at the Hawthorne Club. Sarah's qualification had upended the established hierarchy, with William's endorsement simultaneously protecting her position and intensifying scrutiny. Behind closed doors, Harlow orchestrated a meticulous investigation into her background, growing increasingly frustrated by the unremarkable nature of her public records. "Her file is suspiciously clean," he told Jensen as they inspected the championship range. 30 years as a small-town librarian with a background in environmental science, impeccable credit, no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. "It's too perfect." What Harlow couldn't know was that Sarah's public identity had been carefully constructed after her military service, a necessary measure after her final classified operation had made her powerful enemies who still believed she was dead. Meanwhile, in the small town of Pinerest, Sarah and William reconnected at a quiet diner miles from the club. It was impulsive, she admitted when he asked why she'd entered the competition without warning him. Seeing the Hawthorne Club hosting a charity event to support conservation, while Harlow plans to bulldoze 5,000 acres of protected forest and displace an entire community, I couldn't just sit back and watch anymore. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup as she added softly, "Maybe it's time to reclaim the part of myself I've hidden for too long, especially if it helps save Pinerest." William understood the deeper meaning in her words. He'd witnessed her battles in the military, not just in combat zones but against systemic biases and entrenched prejudices. "Harlow won't make this easy," he warned. "His shooting club is just a front for networking with politicians and wealthy investors. Having a woman, especially one without the right background, show him up would be intolerable to his ego." What neither of them realized was that, at that very moment, in the governor's mansion 30 miles away, Victor Harlow was meeting privately with Governor Richard Moore. "The Pinerest situation is becoming complicated," Harlow was saying, his usual arrogance tempered by deference to power. "Some of the residents are organizing resistance to the resort development." "That's unfortunate," Governor Moore replied, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. "The tax revenue from your project is already factored into next year's budget, not to mention the campaign contributions your investors have provided." Harlow straightened his designer tie. "Nothing we can't handle. We'll proceed with the environmental impact presentation at the championship as planned once you publicly endorse the project there, with all the press in attendance. The local opposition will crumble." The governor nodded, though his expression remained cautious. "And the environmental concerns raised by conservation groups? Those protected wetlands are sensitive political territory, already managed," Harlow assured him with a confident smile. "Our environmental impact study shows minimal disruption to local ecosystems. The scientists who've raised objections have been persuaded to reconsider their positions." What he didn't mention was how that persuasion had been applied, through threatened funding cuts, career sabotage, and in one case, outright bribery. The truth was, Harlow's development would devastate the local watershed and destroy one of the last intact forest ecosystems in the state, facts carefully buried under manipulated data and technical jargon. As the meeting concluded, Harlow mentioned casually, "By the way, we've had an unexpected qualification for the championship. A local librarian from Pinerest itself. Showed surprising skill for an amateur." "Is that a problem?" the governor asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not at all," Harlow replied smoothly. "Just an interesting coincidence. Everything remains on schedule." But as he drove back to the club, Harlow couldn't shake a growing sense of unease about Sarah Winters. Something about her didn't add up, and in his experience, unexpected variables were dangerous. He placed a call to his head of security. "I want everything on Sarah Winters, not just the surface background check. Go deeper, military records, prévious résidence, known associates. There's more to our librarian than she's letting on." Saturday arrived with the preliminary round, set to narrow 20 competitors to 8 finalists. The course was challenging, shooting at distances from 300 to 600 yards, with variable wind conditions. Sarah's modest equipment stood in stark contrast to the expensive custom gear around her. As she checked in, the intercom crackled. "Sarah Winters, please report to the judges' table immediately. There appears to be an issue with your registration." Harlow and 2 officials waited with barely concealed satisfaction. "Miss Winters," Harlow began formally, "it has come to our attention that there may be irregularities with your qualification." He presented a folder containing what appeared to be military records that questioned her disclosed experience level. Sarah examined the documents with outward calm, despite her racing heart. "I followed the guidelines exactly. The form asked for competition experience and formal training courses. I have none in civilian competition. And my military service was administrative." She met Harlow's gaze directly. There was no deception. William appeared at her side, his presence lending silent support. As a founding member familiar with our bylaws, I can confirm that military service doesn't fall under the disclosure requirements as written. The other judges shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to concede. Harlow pressed another accusation. There's also the matter of equipment modifications. Our inspection team noted unauthorized alterations to the club rifle during your qualification. For the first time, indignation cracked Sarah's composed exterior. That's simply untrue. I made standard adjustments, sight alignment, stock positioning, nothing that violates regulations. Her direct challenge to Harlow's integrity heightened the tension palpably. William intervened again. His voice carrying decades of earned authority. I observed the entire qualification. The modifications were within permitted parameters. After a tense silence, another judge awkwardly suggested moving forward with the competition. As Sarah turned to leave, Harlow made one final attempt to regain control. If you're as good as you claim, you should have no objection to a special exhibition match after the preliminaries. On our new testing range with the digital monitoring system, he suggested, a calculating gleam in his eye, the most advanced precision tracking equipment available. No more arguments about qualifications, just pure skill for everyone to judge. The room fell silent. Recognizing his challenge as both trap and opportunity, the new system would be calibrated to Harlow's specifications on unfamiliar ground with maximum pressure, yet it also offered a chance to end questions once and for all. I accept, Sarah said simply, her calm, clearly not what he'd expected. What Harlow couldn't know was that Sarah hadn't just used advanced targeting systems. She had literally written the manual on the technology, forming the backbone of his prized new equipment. The preliminary round proceeded with methodical precision as competitors were gradually eliminated. Sarah advanced through each stage with calculated restraint, qualifying fourth among 8 finalists, competent enough to advance, but deliberately not dominating. William observed her strategy from the sidelines, recognizing she was playing a longer game than Harlow could anticipate. What intrigued him most was how she had managed to maintain her shooting skills at such an elite level while living as a seemingly ordinary librarian. As the regular competition concluded, Harlow commanded center stage with practiced authority. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the room that held few women besides Sarah, we have a special treat today. Hawthorne has recently invested in state-of-the-art targeting technology, the most advanced civilian system available. Pride resonated in his voice as he gestured toward doors leading to a restricted section. Today's exhibition will demonstrate this equipment's capabilities and settle questions about our newest competitor's qualification. All eyes shifted to Sarah, who stood quietly at the gathering's edge, her expression impassive. Miss Winters will demonstrate her skills against mine on the new range, Harlow continued. Unmistakable challenge in his tone. 5 shots at 800 yards with variable wind conditions. The system will analyze every aspect of performance. Trigger pressure, impact force. Everything. His smile never reached his eyes. No room for interpretation. Just objective data. The crowd followed Harlow to the new facility. A climate-controlled indoor range with sophisticated wind simulation technology and massive digital displays showing detailed target information. Even Sarah had to acknowledge the impressive setup, clearly representing significant investment. You'll shoot first, Harlow directed with a gesture barely concealing his certainty of victory. Standard preparation time. 5 consecutive shots. The system records everything automatically, examining the provided rifle. Sarah noticed subtle adjustments designed to disrupt a shooter's rhythm, slightly off balance. Sight alignment fractionally misaligned. Nothing immediately obvious, but enough to affect performance without careful correction. As she settled into position, she spotted something more concerning, a discrepancy in the wind speed indicators that most shooters would miss entirely. Having developed these systems herself, she immediately recognized the deliberate calibration error. The displayed wind conditions didn't match the actual air currents being generated. Anyone trusting the readouts would miss by inches. Rather than exposing the manipulation, Sarah mentally adjusted her calculations. Her first shot produced a perfect hit despite the challenging conditions, generating surprised murmurs throughout the room. Her second and third shots yielded identical results, landing precisely where intended, despite the misleading environmental data. Harlow's expression darkened with each successful shot. By her fifth, which grouped so tightly with previous shots, they formed virtually a single whole. Amazed exclamations replaced murmurs. The digital readout confirmed what everyone witnessed. Sarah Winters had performed at a level few professionals could match. Impressive, Harlow acknowledged stiffly before taking his position, his movements betraying new tension. As he prepared, Sarah noticed a technician discreetly adjusting the control panel, resetting the system to display accurate wind readings for Harlow's turn. The manipulation was so blatant that several onlookers exchanged uncomfortable glances. William's expression hardened with disappointment. Watching his old friend resort to such tactics, despite shooting well, professionally competent but lacking Sarah's extraordinary precision, Harlow couldn't match her performance. When the system displayed overall results, the difference was undeniable. Tense silence fell as Harlow stared at the display, knuckles white around his rifle. Before he could diminish her achievement, Sarah stepped forward. "I believe there may be calibration issues with the system," she said clearly, despite her soft voice. "The wind indicators displayed values that didn't match actual conditions during my round." She turned toward the technician who had adjusted the settings. "Fortunately, I've had experience with similar systems and compensated accordingly." The implication hung clearly in the air. Harlow's face flushed with embarrassment as he recognized his predicament. "Technical glitches happen with new equipment." Head dismissed. "We'll recalibrate before tomorrow's finals. Perhaps we should have one final opportunity," Sarah suggested, her gentle tone belying the steel beneath. "With properly verified equipment and no interference. And I'll take the last shot." The challenge was unmistakable, a fair contest where skill alone would determine the outcome. Harlow hesitated, but with his reputation at stake before so many witnesses, he had little choice. "Fine," he agreed tersely. "One shot each. Maximum distance. Verified settings." He gestured toward William. "Colonel Daniels will verify the equipment. Let's settle this once and for all." The range was reset for the final challenge, a single shot at 1,000 yards. The maximum the indoor facility could accommodate. This was extreme range shooting, the domain of elite specialists, where the slightest miscalculation meant complete failure. William personally verified every aspect of the system's calibration, his thoroughness, leaving no room for manipulation. The gathered crowd fell silent in anticipation of what had become far more than a simple exhibition. "Ladies first," Harlow offered with forced courtesy. Sarah shook her head. "I believe I requested the final shot. I'm content to wait." Something in her calm certainty visibly unsettled him, but he nodded stiffly and took his position. His preparation was meticulous as he calculated every variable before taking his shot. The room collectively held its breath until the impact registered, an excellent shot landing within 2 inches of dead center. Appreciative applause followed as he stepped back, unable to hide his satisfaction. "Your turn, Miss Winters," he said with barely concealed triumph. "That's going to be difficult to beat." Sarah approached with the same quiet focus she'd maintained throughout the day. A strange hush fell over the room, not just silence, but weighted anticipation, as if everyone sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary. Her movements were fluid, unhurried, each adjustment precise without being fussy. The economy of her actions spoke of thousands of hours refined into pure efficiency. William watched with mentor's pride, alone, fully understanding what Sarah was capable of. When Sarah finally squeezed the trigger, the shot seemed almost anticlimactic. A clean report followed by absolute silence as everyone turned to the digital display. For a moment, the system appeared to glitch, not immediately registering the impact. Then the results appeared, and an audible gasp swept through the room. Her bullet had struck the absolute dead center of the target, a perfect shot at a distance most civilian shooters would consider nearly impossible. But it wasn't just the accuracy that stunned onlookers. It was the additional readings. The monitor displayed analytics about impact, force, and velocity exceeding the parameters. The system was designed to measure. A warning flashed. Measurement limits exceeded. The shot had been so perfectly executed that it had essentially broken the tracking capabilities of the state-of-the-art system. As implications sank in, All eyes turned to Sarah. Seeing her truly for the first time, not as an interloper, but as a master of her craft, Harlow stared at the monitor in disbelief. His earlier satisfaction evaporating before irrefutable evidence. This wasn't just a better shot than his. It demonstrated skill on an entirely different level. Before he could respond, a technician approached with confused respect. "Sir? The system is showing unusual readings. According to the database, the shooting pattern and precision metrics match the system's original calibration protocols, the ones provided by the manufacturer's lead designer." A murmur spread as Harlow turned to Sarah. "What does that mean? How is that possible?" But William stepped forward, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile at what he clearly considered long overdue recognition. "It means, Victor, that you've been privileged to witness something remarkable today," William said, his voice carrying easily. The original calibration protocols for this system were developed by Captain Sarah Winters during her service with the Advanced Tactical Systems Division. The patents are classified, but the technology you're so proud of installing, she helped design it. He turned to Sarah with unmistakable pride. "Isn't that right, Captain?" All eyes shifted to Sarah, who maintained her composure despite being the center of attention. "The core tracking algorithms are based on work I did." "Yes," she acknowledged quietly. "Although this is a civilian adaptation with certain limitations compared to the military-grade systems," her understatement only emphasized the gap between her expertise and the assumptions made about her capability. "You designed this system?" Jensen asked incredulously. "Then why are you working as a librarian? Why aren't you competing professionally?" "When I left the service, I wanted a different life. One where I wasn't defined solely by my shooting abilities or military background," she replied, glancing at William, a shared understanding passing between them. "But some skills never leave you, even when you set them aside for a while." As the crowd dispersed, buzzing with this revelation, Harlow approached Sarah with surprising humility. "Your skill is undeniable, Miss Winters, or should I say, Captain. I hope you'll still join us for tomorrow's finals. The governor will be attending. It would be unfortunate if our most impressive competitor were absent." His tone was conciliatory, but something in his eyes, a calculated assessment, told Sarah that his invitation wasn't about sportsmanship. It was about damage control and preserving his plans. "Whatever they might be, I wouldn't miss it," she replied evenly, "especially since I understand the competition is raising awareness for environmental conservation. As someone deeply concerned about the Pinerest forest preservation, I look forward to hearing more about these initiatives." The subtle shift in Harlow's expression confirmed what Sarah suspected. There was far more at stake tomorrow than a shooting trophy. The morning of the finals dawned with unexpected controversy at the Hawthorne Club. Local news vans clustered at the entrance, their presence unusual for what had previously been considered a niche sporting event. Sarah arrived to find the competitors' area buzzing with speculation. "Did you hear?" a young shooter asked excitedly as she signed in. Some environmental group released documents claiming Harlow's resort development would contaminate the entire county's water supply. "They're protesting outside right now. Radical environmentalists," scoffed another competitor, always exaggerating to push their agenda. Sarah kept her expression neutral. Though her pulse quickened, she knew exactly which documents they were referring to, the actual environmental impact study that Harlow's team had buried, showing catastrophic effects on the watershed that served 5 counties, the study that mysteriously appeared in the email inboxes of every environmental reporter in the state late last night. In the executive lounge, Harlow was in crisis management mode, surrounded by public relations, staff, and lawyers. The governor had arrived early, foregoing the planned ceremonial entrance, his security detail keeping reporters at bay while damage control strategies were formulated. "This is a coordinated attack," Harlow insisted, pacing the luxurious room. "Someone deliberately timed this to sabotage both the competition and the resort announcement." Governor Moore loosened his tie, his political instincts on high alert. "The authenticity of these documents, can they be verified?" "They're fabrications," Harlow declared, though his eyes shifted slightly, the tell of a man not entirely confident in his assertion. "Our official environmental impact study showed minimal concerns." all easily mitigated. That's not what these documents suggest. The governor replied coolly. They contain data with your company's watermark. Detailed hydrological surveys showing permanent aquifer damage and projections of widespread contamination. If these are authentic, my public support today would be political suicide. Harlow leaned closer, lowering his voice. Richard, we've come too far to back out now. The investments, the arrangements we've made, consider what's at stake for both of us. The implied threat hung in the air between them, mutual assured destruction if their private arrangements became public. Find out who's behind this leak, the governor finally ordered. In the meantime, I'll delay the announcement. Cite the need for further review of all environmental concerns. Show appropriate caution without validating these claims. On the competition range, preparations continued. Despite the controversy, Sarah took her assigned position, methodically checking her equipment while maintaining awareness of the subtle chaos unfolding around her. William approached, ostensibly to offer technical advice, but his murmured words carried a warning. Harlow's security team is reviewing surveillance footage from the club computers. If they determine the leak came from here— Sarah nodded, almost imperceptibly. Then we accelerate the timeline. Is everything in place? 8 reporters have the complete file, including the falsified permits and financial records. The State Environmental Protection Director has the water samples showing existing contamination at the test drilling sites. It's all in motion. The conversation ended as Jensen approached, his previous mockery replaced by wary respect. Miss Winters. Mr. Harlow requests your presence before the competition begins. Something about ensuring today's events proceed smoothly despite the distractions. The meeting took place in Harlow's private office, a shrine to his accomplishments with trophies and photographs of Harlow alongside politicians and celebrities covering the walls. The governor was notably absent, having sequestered himself with advisors to assess damage control options. Captain Winters, Harlow began, dispensing with pretense. I'll be direct. The timing of this environmental controversy and your sudden appearance in my competition seems like an extraordinary coincidence. I find that life is full of such coincidences, Sarah replied evenly. Harlow leaned forward, his previous charm replaced by cold intensity. Let me be clear. The Pinerest development represents years of planning and millions in investment. These leaked documents, regardless of their origin, contain selective data being presented without context by people who don't understand the comprehensive mitigation measures planned. I have a master's degree in environmental science with a focus on watershed management. Sarah countered. I understand the data perfectly, including what it means for the 5,000 people whose water supply would be compromised. Something shifted in Harlow's expression, surprise, followed by recalculation. Then perhaps we've been approaching this all wrong. Someone with your expertise could be valuable to our team, ensuring the project meets the highest environmental standards. The compensation would be significant. The bribe was as transparent as it was substantial. But Sarah merely smiled. That's quite an offer, Mr. Harlow. But I believe I'll focus on today's competition first. After all, isn't that why we're here? To determine who's truly the best? Harlow's jaw tightened. Indeed. Though I wonder if you've considered the broader implications of your actions. Pinerest needs economic development, new jobs, increased tax revenue. Without this resort, it remains a dying town where even the librarian needs to enter shooting competitions for prize money. The veiled threat did not go unnoticed. But Sarah maintained her composure as she stood to leave. I've always found that the truth eventually finds its way to the surface. Mr. Harlow, like groundwater, you can divert it, even contaminate it. But eventually, it reaches the light. Back on the range, final preparations were underway. The competition format had been modified due to the morning's disruptions, condensed to a single decisive round featuring the 4 top qualifiers from yesterday's preliminaries. Each would face an extreme challenge, 10 targets appearing in unpredictable sequences at varying distances, with only seconds to acquire and engage each one. As Governor Moore finally emerged from seclusion to take his place in the VIP section, Sarah noticed the careful neutrality of his prepared remarks. none of the enthusiastic endorsement of the resort project that had been planned. But no outright disavowal either. A politician's careful hedging, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. When her turn came, Sarah stepped up to the firing line amidst a hush of anticipation. This was the moment, not just to win a competition, but to create a public platform that couldn't be ignored. The targets would begin appearing randomly once she signaled readiness. 10 targets in 10 seconds. At distances ranging from 200 to 800 yards. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. When she opened them, gone was the quiet librarian, replaced by the focused operator who had once been the military's most lethal precision shooter. She nodded to the range officer, and the sequence began. What followed left spectators breathless. Sarah's movements were a blur of controlled precision. Acquire. Fire. Transition. Acquire. Fire. Her body seeming to flow between positions with inhuman speed. Each shot found the exact center of each target's head zone, regardless of distance or angle. There was no hesitation. No correction. Just perfect execution that bordered on the impossible. 10 perfect headshots in 10 seconds. The digital scoreboard flashed a perfect score with a notation, new world record. The silence that followed was profound, broken only when William began to applaud, others gradually joining, until the sound filled the entire facility. Even journalists covering the environmental controversy had stopped to witness what many would later describe as the most extraordinary display of shooting skill ever recorded. As Sarah lowered her weapon, she found herself surrounded by competitors, offering congratulations and technical questions. The controversy over her presence had transformed into undisguised admiration for her mastery. Harlow approached, his public smile firmly in place, though his eyes remained cold. Remarkable performance. Captain Winters, it seems the trophy is yours, along with the accompanying prize package. Thank you, Sarah replied, conscious of the reporters now turning their attention from the environmental protest to the unexpected champion. I believe the winner traditionally says a few words. Harlow hesitated, clearly calculating the risks of giving Sarah a public platform. But the protocols of the competition left him little choice. Of course, after the formal award presentation, the ceremony was hastily arranged on the club's grand terrace, with the governor presenting the trophy with carefully measured enthusiasm. When the microphone was finally passed to Sarah, a noticeable tension fell over the officials seated behind her. Thank you for this recognition, she began, her voice clear and steady. It's especially meaningful to receive it here. In the county, I've called home for nearly 20 years. Pinerest may be small, but it represents something irreplaceable, a community where people still connect with each other and with the natural world around them. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd, noting the reporters leaning forward attentively. I entered this competition because I believe in fair contests where skill and preparation determine the outcome, not influence or privilege. That belief extends beyond sports to how we make decisions about our communities and our environment. Harlow shifted uncomfortably behind her, but could do nothing to interrupt without creating an obvious scene. Today we've seen controversy over documents revealing the true environmental impact of a proposed development. As someone with expertise in both watershed management and in detecting when targets are obscured or misrepresented, I can affirm that these documents are authentic. I know because I was part of the original assessment team whose findings were altered. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. The governor's expression had frozen in a political mask, while Harlow half rose from his seat before his PR director urgently pulled him back down. The proposed resort wouldn't just reshape the landscape, it would permanently damage the aquifer supplying water to 5 counties. The facts were clear in the original assessment, an assessment that mysteriously disappeared from public records. Sarah held up a flash drive. This contains the complete original study, along with documentation showing how the data was manipulated, who authorized those changes, and which officials were compensated to overlook regulatory violations. Copies have been provided to environmental agencies, law enforcement, and every news outlet represented here today. The crowd erupted in questions as reporters surged forward. Security personnel looked uncertainly between Harlow and the governor, awaiting direction that didn't come. As both men appeared momentarily paralyzed by the implications, Sarah continued, her voice cutting through the commotion. I didn't come back to Pinerest and enter this competition, seeking glory or to settle old scores. I did it because sometimes protecting what matters requires stepping into the spotlight, even when you've spent years avoiding it. She looked directly at Harlow. You once suggested I should know my place. Today I've shown exactly what that place is, standing between those who would exploit power for profit and the communities they would sacrifice. As chaos erupted around the stage, with reporters shouting questions and officials huddling in emergency consultation, William appeared at Sarah's side. I believe that's what they call a kill shot. Captain, he said quietly, clean, precise, and absolutely final. 3 months later, Sarah Winters sat on the porch of her modest home near the Pinerest Public Library, watching golden afternoon light filter through ancient oaks that had narrowly escaped the developers' bulldozers. The Hawthorne Resort project had been permanently shelved following multiple investigations: environmental, financial, and criminal. Victor Harlow was fighting charges, ranging from fraud to bribery, while Governor Moore had announced he would not seek re-election, citing family priorities. The transformation in Pinerest had been equally dramatic, though in more positive ways. The town had become something of a pilgrimage site for shooting enthusiasts hoping to glimpse the librarian whose competition performance had broken 7 world records. More importantly, a coalition of conservation groups had purchased the threatened forest lands, placing them in permanent protection with facilities for education and sustainable recreation. William Daniels climbed the steps to join her, carrying a folder and 2 glasses of iced tea. The final paperwork on the Conservation Trust, he explained, setting the documents between them, signed and registered. 5,000 acres preserved in perpetuity. Sarah signed where indicated, a sense of completion settling over her. Worth coming out of the shadows for. Speaking of which, William said, sliding a different envelope across the table. This came from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. They're establishing a scholarship program for female competitive shooters and want you to be the honorary chairperson. No pressure to compete. Just lend your name and perhaps conduct occasional master classes. Sarah considered the offer. Watching a group of schoolchildren following a nature guide along the forest trail visible from her porch. A few months ago, I would have declined immediately. Stayed hidden. Now you've remembered there's power in visibility. William finished for her. In being exactly who you are without apology? She nodded, thinking of the young women who had approached her in recent weeks, some interested in shooting sports, others in environmental science, all drawn to the story of a simple woman who had challenged power and prevailed. The ghost was a shadow, designed to be invisible and denied. Sato reflected, but Sarah Winters, librarian, environmental scientist, community member, she can stand in the light and make a different kind of impact. As evening approached, bringing with it the chorus of forest creatures, Sarah made her decision. The world had labeled her a simple woman, underestimated her based on appearances and assumptions. That mistake had cost her opponents everything, while opening unexpected new chapters in her own life. Sometimes, she thought, as she signed the acceptance letter, the most powerful position is the one where others don't see you coming, until you fire 10 perfect shots and change everything.